Today we are going over financial aid awareness for the month of February, which, if you didn't know, is National Financial Aid Awareness Month. We are lucky and privileged to have Arianna Gray, the Assistant Director of Financial Aid and Veteran Affairs at Collin College, here to be our subject matter expert, our SME. We are so honored that she gave her afternoon, an hour of her afternoon, here to be with us. And without further ado, here is Arianna.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me to do this. I love speaking about financial aid, and this is a good time to be having this conversation.
All right, Arianna, I will be your production assistant for today.
Okay, all right, so go ahead to the first slide. Okay, so we're going to do an overview of the coming year's FAFSA, which is called the 24-25, since it starts in the fall of 24 and ends in spring or summer, depending on the school of 2025. And a lot of big changes this year, this coming year. Back in 2020, Congress passed this huge sweeping legislation called the FAFSA Simplification Act. And it was a significant overhaul of the awarding and processing of federal student aid. In fact, it is the largest overhaul that has been done since the Reagan era. So big, giant changes. It changes everything from the actual application in an effort to make it more simplified. Families and students have been complaining over the years that the FAFSA was a little too complicated, and we found that families weren't filling it out or were quitting in the middle because they were frustrated. So the whole entire FAFSA application itself has been simplified. The formula used to determine aid eligibility has also changed pretty drastically, and it's allowing for more students to have eligibility for Pell Grant, which we're really excited about because it's really going to reach a population of students that hasn't been eligible previously to get financial aid for school. It changed some of the terminology that we use, and we'll go over that, as well as some of the policies and procedures that schools use to award aid. Go ahead, next slide. So the timing is a little off this year because of these sweeping changes. The Department of Ed had to completely move everything to new platforms, completely new software. They had to develop this new process with the IRS that didn't exist previously. And because of that, the FAFSA was delayed this year. Typically, in most years, students can begin filling out the FAFSA October 1 for that following fall. This year, it didn't open until technically December 31st. It was really January 1 for the 24-25 school year. And even then, it has been up and down periodically as they are finding little bugs, little issues, and fixing them as quickly as possible. But at this point in the process, it appears to be running fairly well. There's a few unresolved issues that they're working frantically to fix, but a lot of the issues that initially we saw in January have been resolved. And so students are definitely encouraged to get in there and to get it filled out for the award year, for the fall award year. The schools are not going to be getting the FAFSA until about mid-March. They're saying early March, but that could be anywhere up to March 15th. So right now, students are simply filling it out, and it is waiting or sitting on the Department of Ed server while the schools test the data and make sure that their software programs are updated. All the schools in the country have different software they use to process financial aid, and all of those companies have to update their software to match the new formulas that the Department of Ed designed for this new process. So they're testing that data right now, and we should be receiving students' data somewhere in the early to mid-March timeframe. The good news is that everyone's in the same boat. There's no students that have some kind of a secret into their schools or particular schools who have a faster process than anybody else. So everyone's in the same boat, and the schools will receive everyone's data more or less at the same time. And we'll be working frantically, I promise you, to get everybody processed for the award year before the school's deadline for payment. It is recommended that students follow up with the schools that they had their FAFSA sent to as soon as they get notification that the school has received it, to ensure that their sometimes the FAFSA is flagged for additional data. So for those students to make sure that they get that additional data to the school, which is going to allow the schools to get them processed and awarded as quickly as possible. Go ahead, next slide. So the FAFSA application itself is available right now on the FAFSA website, which is fafsa.gov. Just so that you know, FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So there's no charge to fill out the application. Students and possibly both parents or a spouse if a student is married need to apply for an FSA ID at least 3 days prior to filling out the application. That FSA ID is used as the person's electronic signature, and it might be required for all of those parties concerned. Students will need the following information. If the student is under 24, not married, doesn't have children of their own, didn't serve in the military, they will need to provide at least one of their parents' information, so that they'll need the parent or their spouse's name, date of birth, and social security number, as well as an email address. Those people will be invited to add their information to the student's FAFSA, and that's why the student needs that information in order for that invitation to be generated. The student will also need their own income and asset information. The parent or the spouse, depending on which case it is for the student filling out the FAFSA, will receive an invite via the email that the student put on their FAFSA, and they'll go in again and fill out their own section of the FAFSA. Next slide. Now there's some pretty big changes again with regards to these people receiving this invitation. In the past, everyone just logged into the student's FAFSA and you could do different parts of it. And then the parent and the student would sign the FAFSA. But that has changed pretty drastically, and that the FAFSA is what they call roles driven now. So the roles include the applicant, which is the student, the spouse of a married independent student, and that person is called a contributor to the FAFSA, the custodial parent of a dependent student, also called a contributor, the parent's spouse or partner. Now, this may be the student's other parent. It could be a step parent. And that person would also be called the contributor. And then the FAFSA has always had something called third-party preparers that could go in and fill out information on behalf of the student and the family. That still exists, but their role is greatly limited now because they cannot sign for the student or for the spouse or for the parent. So they have to do much more coordination now if they're going to go in and help families. The contributors, just to clarify, is any individual required to provide consent and approval for federal tax information along with their signature on the FAFSA form. Next slide. So let me go over the definition of a custodial parent, because it is different if the parents are separated or divorced than it used to be in the past. The primary or custodial parent is the parent who provides the greater portion of support to the student, regardless of who the student lives with. That is a change from what it was in the past. It was always who the student lived with or lived with most recently, but now it is dependent on who has given the student the most financial support, either currently or if the student has moved out and is living on their own, then the parent who has provided the most financial support in the 12 months leading up to filling out the FAFSA. If the parents state that they both equally support the student, which they do a lot, by the way, the primary or custodial parent, so the parent who will fill out the FAFSA, is the one with the most income and assets. That is also a big change from previous years. Note if the custodial parent has remarried, and so there is a step parent there, a legal step parent, that person's information must be included on the FAFSA, not the other biological parent. Go ahead to the next slide. The FSA ID, again, that is something obtained that you use as your electronic signature to sign these documents for the Department of Ed. Students can no longer access the FAFSA application by simply providing a personal identifier and a save key, which they could do previously. What this did is allow them to fill out the FAFSA prior to their FSA ID being confirmed by the Social Security Administration. They can no longer do this. They must have a confirmed FSA ID in order to fill out the application. That is why a couple of slides ago, we mentioned that students and parents and spouses must apply for that FSA ID at least 3 days prior to the student attempting to fill out the application, or they won't be able to access it. A new process introduced this year is that the parents or spouses without a Social Security number are able to apply for an FSA ID. In the past, they could not. They would have to do a physical signature on the application. There's been a little bit of an issue with this, however, in that it hasn't worked exactly how the Department of Ed would have liked it to work. But we actually just saw information today from the Department of Ed saying that they expect that these issues will be fixed by the beginning of March. So for parents and spouses to sit tight, and that will be back up and running. And that greatly reduces the time and sort of the issues involved with these people signing the FAFSA. So it's worth maybe my opinion, but it's worth the issues that they've run into, because it'll make it so much nicer over the long run for these people to obtain this FSA ID. Next slide. Okay, student aid index. This is huge. I have been in financial aid almost 25 years, and this is very, very big. In the past, if you're familiar with the application, it produces something in the past called the expected family contribution. This was sort of the magic index number that schools used to award a student any kind of financial aid. This has been changed now, the actual terminology, to the student aid index. We're excited about this because in the past, using the term expected family contribution, families expected they would have to pay this amount of money before the student could get any aid. And that was never the case. It was always simply an index that the schools used in order to award aid to the student. So now it more accurately reflects what this number is. It functions pretty much the same as the EFC did, again, telling schools how much they can award an aid in both need-based and non-need-based aid. The weird difference is that the EFC would never go lower than a 0. 0 was as low as you could go. With the SAI, it can go as low as a negative 1,500, which is interesting. For most schools, especially community colleges like Collin or the state public universities and things like that, that negative 1,500 will just be used as if it were a 0. The negative 1,500 comes into play for schools that have institutional aid, so aid that their school gives to the student. It's not federal or state aid. In order to assist them to award more accurately to the groups that they're targeting that aid to, they will be able to use those negative numbers to determine who they give their aid to. So that's a really added benefit to those schools who have that ability to award that extra aid. Interestingly, schools got to run some mock files through a mock system last year to see if they were to go to that new formula immediately, what would it do to their population? Would students lose aid? Would students gain aid? What would happen to it? In the test cases, more students were eligible for Pell Grant with the SAI formula than with the EFC formula. So we saw a great increase in the number of students that were eligible for Pell than previously under the old formula. The Department of Ed has published numbers that say up to 600,000 additional students will be eligible for Pell Grant with this new formula. Next slide. Okay, so some more tips to talk about here. High school students should not use their high school email address on the FAFSA. There's a couple of reasons for this. The most obvious one, or maybe it's not obvious to everybody, most of the high schools block outside email addresses so the students can't receive emails from outside agencies. So they may never see their email from the FAFSA, from the Department of Ed. In addition, once they graduate, that email is going to be inactivated. So that's not going to be helpful either. They really should use their Yahoo Gmail, their private email account that will always be available to them in order to receive these very important emails from the Department of Ed. When filling out the FAFSA, students need the school code of the colleges or universities they're thinking of attending. This tells the Department of Ed who to send the FAFSA data to. Students can search for on the school's website or call or email the school and say, what is your school code for FAFSA? And the school will give it to them or they'll find it on the website. The FAFSA does have a search function where the student can search for the name of the school. They have run into some issues with this, however, where the name of the school is being truncated. And there in certain areas, there's a lot of schools that start with the same couple of words, especially if it's the name of the state. And so students have chosen the wrong school and that sort of thing. So we recommend, and the Department of Ed recommends, students go out to the school's website and get that actual 6-digit code. That will make sure that the right schools get that FAFSA data for that student. Next slide. Okay, special circumstances. So the FAFSA uses income information for the student and parents from 2 years prior to the aid year. So for example, for the 24-25 aid year, we're going to use the 2022 tax return information. But we see with a lot of families that their family situation may have changed dramatically since that tax year. For example, maybe one of the parents or the student or the spouse were laid off from their job and no longer have that income. Maybe there was a divorce, maybe there was a death in the family, and again, that income is not there. In these cases, students can follow up with their school and request the school to review their situation to see if it warrants adjustment to the FAFSA data that was used to calculate that SAI. Most public schools will do and are required to do these income reductions if it makes a difference. You will not see all private schools do that. That is up to them if they do this process or not. So we tell students, go and talk to the financial aid office at your school you're going to be attending to see if they can look at your data. The unfortunate thing is you cannot report this adjusted data when you're filling out the FAFSA. You must use the data it is asking for. So meaning your income information from 2022, this request for an adjustment must go through the school itself. So the student follows up with the school once the school receives the FAFSA to see if they can look at this adjustment. Just so that you know, while it's 50 years ago, I'm fudging that I filled out a FAFSA. The year that I filled it out was because my husband and I had both been laid off from our jobs. And so we did request and did receive this adjustment to our FAFSA data. And I was eligible for 1 year while I was in college. Again, students should always follow up with the school and have this discussion with the school because you can't report this adjusted information on the FAFSA itself. Next slide. Multiple forms of aid. This we get a lot of questions about this. Students and families are very confused about this point. Students can receive financial aid and scholarships at the same time. In fact, we recommend students apply for all types of aid, including scholarships, and get everything you can get. At some of the larger schools that are more expensive, this is really important because federal aid is probably not even going to come close to paying for everything. Apply for those scholarships. And if you're eligible, if you're an athlete and you're getting athletic aid on top of it, you can still get financial aid with that. Similarly, if you are eligible for a state of Texas exemption, which exempts you from paying the tuition and fees at a public school in Texas, you can use that and still get financial aid. It will actually put more financial aid dollars straight into your pocket since none of that is going to pay your tuition and fees. Students do not have to apply for state aid separately from federal aid. When schools receive your FAFSA data, they will look and see if you are eligible for any kind of state aid and automatically award that to you. So you don't have to do that separately, which is fabulous. Because the whole process is disconcerting for a lot of families. And so that makes it a little bit more of a smooth process for these families. Next slide. Federal Work Study is a great program. I did Federal Work Study when I was in college, and it's really what led to me working in financial aid after I graduated. This is a particular type of federal aid that you can be eligible for. This allows a student to work on campus up to 20 hours a week and earn extra money. Schools are required to pay at least the minimum wage, but many schools choose to pay higher than that, depending on their particular population. For example, Collin College pays $12 an hour right now. And we do that to stay competitive with the employers who are around our campus. And so you'll see schools doing that. These jobs count as real work experiences. We have had work study students here come to work for us, and their work study experience did count on their application, on their resume as real work experience. You're not just sitting around studying and getting paid to do that. The department will actually train you, and you will work just as you do with a regular job. You have to show up on time and things like that. So for a lot of these young people who don't have work experience, this is a great way to do that. And the added benefit for a lot of the students in doing these types of jobs, they don't have to leave campus in between classes, go drive to their job, find a parking place, do their job, and then leave that, come back to campus. You're just working on campus. So this can be really convenient. This can be really convenient for people attending schools in areas that have bad weather at certain times of the year, because again, you don't have to leave campus in order to do these. Next slide. Okay, just to add to the work study information as well, for graduate students interested in becoming a resident advisor or a teaching assistant, do go and talk to the financial aid office at your school, because the procedures or the process for this can vary from school to school. So I don't want to give information that may not be applicable to the school you're going to be attending. So just go and talk to the financial aid office once you have filled out the FAFSA and ask them, how do I apply for these? Am I eligible for these programs at the school? So just to wrap up, in a typical year, students who fill out and submit the FAFSA the earliest may be eligible for additional state or institutional money because they met the priority deadline of the school. These priority dates vary greatly from school to school and state to state. So students really should, again, go out to the school's website or call the financial aid office at that school and ask what the priority deadline is. For example, Collin College uses the state of Texas priority deadline, which is January 15th. But this year that has actually been moved, I believe, to April 15th because of the delay of the FAFSA. So check with the school on their priority deadline, but each year do apply early. Really the biggest problems we see with students filling out the FAFSA is they wait until the last minute and fill it out. And then they're either scrambling to get documentation in and to meet the payment deadline date, or just running into other issues with those kinds of things. With maybe they had to order a tax transcript from the IRS that could take a couple of weeks to receive. So all of that is a delay in receiving your financial aid offer. The earlier you apply, even if you're not sure you're going to go to college yet, or there's some other issue that you're debating, go ahead and fill out the application. It's free. Fill it out early, get it sent to the schools. If you never apply to that school, never end up enrolling in classes, it's not a problem. No harm, no foul. There's no aid. The ages will disappear off of their system. So go ahead and do it. And then that way there, if you do decide to go, boom, your financial aid is there and ready for you when you need it the most. So I can't express to you enough how much you really should apply early, because it's just going to make your life so much easier. And again, with some schools, could end up in you receiving a little bit of an extra gift in your aid offer for applying early. Next slide. And that's really everything about financial aid for this year that we feel students and families should know. And if there's any questions.
Yep, I'll give y'all time for some questions. Arianna, I wrote down some of my own to ask
Sure.
you personally. A couple other things I want to just also add on top of, besides federal financial aid, from a lot of stuff, a lot of questions that students and parents ask me when I do presentations at high schools myself. Um, you know, for myself, I actually paid for my first couple of semesters with local scholarships. So check with your school's counselor office, students and parents, see if they have a local scholarship form. Some ISDs will actually have one form that will go through the city itself or the local chamber of commerce, and that will collect all the information from businesses donating scholarships to help pay for those. Because trust me, I have a lot of students tell me, Josh, I don't want that $200 or $500 scholarship. And my response is, but that's $200 more than you had before. And those small scholarships add up. I think I got like $3,000 total in small dollar scholarships. So those really helped. Um, if you're looking for scholarship applications, a lot of colleges, including community colleges like Collin, have a foundation that offers scholarships for incoming freshmen and current students. So that's something that's overlooked often. And again, these are aid for you. They're scholarships. They're not loans. So the money you do not have to repay back. I also recommend when you're going through the FAFSA or applying for scholarships, create a binder for yourself to keep, all your important documents, your recommendation letters, your transcripts, because you'll need multiple copies of them if you're applying for multiple forms of aid, and that way everything's nice and organized for you, and you're not scrambling trying to find where you saved this here, where you put that. If you were like me in school, it probably ended up in the bottom of your backpack, all crumpled up, and you couldn't read anymore, and you had to go back and get a new one uh, for that. And then if you are working, if you're a student working or you're going back for your degree, check with your employer to see if they have a work tuition reimbursement program. A lot of employers have these now. There typically is a wait period where you have to work there for 90 days, a year before you qualify for them. But a lot of employers will help reimburse tuition or book expenses for you. So double check that as another form of aid there. All right. So we got a question coming in, so I'll go ahead and start with those there. Ariana, the first question from the audience is, can a student get a student loan even if the FAFSA determines they don't need one?
Yes. And so when they fill out the FAFSA and it is delivering to the schools that SAI, One of the things that tells us, are they eligible for need-based aid, which would include things like grants, work study, that sort of a thing, as well as subsidized student loans. If there is no need in their formula, all students are still eligible for unsubsidized student loans. The percentage on the interest is exactly the same as a subsidized loan. The difference is that the government is not paying the interest capitalization while the student is in school. They must pay that or tack it on to the end of the loan. But yes, everyone's son or daughter, we joke with people and say, like Oprah, if she had children, they can get an unsubsidized student loan. So everybody is eligible for that.
And to add on to that, before you turn to loans completely, we do ask that you exhaust all other forms of aid first. So it should be free money, which is grants, scholarships, work study, all of that, and then any money you have saved for college, and then use borrowing as your third option. Not saying taking out a student loan is something frowned upon or something you shouldn't do, but we want to make sure you're taking out the least amount of debt for school as possible. I see several students bring award letters to me, Arianna. I'm sure you've seen it yourself, and they only need X amount, but they got approved for a higher amount. And it's tempting to take that higher amount, but remember, you have to pay all that back. So do you want to pay
Correct.
40,000 back, or do you want to pay 90,000 back with that interest as well? So it's kind of up there. And Arianna, I know when we were setting this up, you had a really good uh, message about credit cards and paying for school. So do you want to share your insight there?
Yes, when I'm doing high school presentations, because when we get to the point in the high school presentation where I mention loans, I see a bunch of heads shake no. And I tell them, look, I just saw a bunch of heads shake no, yay. Don't take out loans if you don't have to take out loans. But something in the 20 years I've been at Collin that I have seen year after year is I will walk by the cashier's office during payment deadline time and watch students and parents pull a credit card out and hand it to the cashier. And I think in our society, we have all forgotten a credit card is a loan and you're paying it back, and you're paying it back with a much larger interest rate than the student loans through the federal government. So if they're paying for their tuition and fees and books with that credit card, I want them to stop and say, wait a minute, that's a loan. And do I want a better percentage than that?
Yep, she is correct. Student loan rates typically are lower than credit card rates. And it seems convenient, but we got to think long term, right? So that's something to consider and stop and think before we do that. Ariana, another question. This is actually a good question. Will completing FAFSA applications drive down any available scholarships?
This is a complicated question. I will answer it. I'm hoping I don't lose anybody in this. Part of the formula that is used when we receive the SAI from the Department of Ed is we're going to put that number up against the school's cost of attendance, or as it's more colloquially known, the budget. And so we take the school's budget and subtract that SAI, and that tells us whether the student has a need or not. Now, that SAI is never going to change that year, regardless of whether they go to Collin College or Harvard. But the cost of attendance of the school will change dramatically. Needless to say, Harvard's got a much higher cost of attendance. And that's not just taking into account tuition and fees and books, but things like room and board and transportation and things like that. So if you live in a higher cost of living area, that will also drive a school's cost of attendance up. Per federal regs, no school can ever award a student more financial aid, which includes scholarships, than that cost of attendance. So technically the answer to that question is yes, it could affect the scholarship money, because if the student gets all of this financial aid and then scholarships are coming in, we can never award more than that cost of attendance. But let me put it into perspective for you. Collin College's cost of attendance, because again, we're not just taking direct costs into account with the cost of attendance. We're taking things like room, board, transportation, miscellaneous personal things that the student would need during the school year. Our cost of attendance is over $20,000. That may or may not be what you actually pay out of your pocket to attend here, but based on the rules of developing a cost of attendance, that our cost of attendance is like 22,000. The most that we just have freshmen and sophomore for the most part. The most that a sophomore could get if they were eligible for everything here is probably about 12, 13, $14,000. So that would still leave them $6, $7, $8,000 worth of scholarship money that they could still use on top of it. The more expensive the school, the more that applies. They could definitely, because if a sophomore here can only get a maximum of, if they literally applied early and got everything, might be around 14,000. Take that 14,000 and you're going to Harvard or you're going to MIT. It's barely going to make a dent. You have a lot of room there for scholarship money. So yes, technically it could affect if the student literally got every single piece of aid they were eligible for, maxed out their loans and everything. It might limit how much scholarship money you can receive in that particular year. We seldom see that actually happen in reality. We don't usually see that happen because very few of our students are taking out, they'll usually opt not to get loans and then get that scholarship money. So we just don't see it happen too often. That was a lot, but I didn't want anyone to get lost in there.
Thank you. Okay, I've got three that I have, and we've got another one in here. Uh, Easy one, Ariane, or easy in my opinion. The FSA ID that they get for the FAFSA, is that the same every year, or will it change every time they put in a FAFSA application?
Good question. No, once you get your FSA ID, it will remain the same for your life. Basically, I have the same FSA ID now that I did back when I went to college so many years ago. So if parents, when they went to college, if they had an FSA ID, they'll be using that same FSA ID to sign their child's FAFSA. So it's the same one pretty much forever, unless something happens with identity theft or something like that. It'll be the same one your whole life.
Right. Um, I wrote that down because I do get a lot of questions myself during high school presentations about that, and a lot of students and parents think they apply once and it's done. And no, we do encourage you to apply, put a FAFSA application in each year, just because there is a chance items could have changed, and you could be losing out on aid if you because you didn't put that in there. So always apply. I mean, the worst that can happen is you're told, nope, nothing new this year. But we would hate for people to lose out on any opportunity.
Oh, for
To
sure. Yes. When it comes to the FAFSA, you have to renew that every year, basically. So you do have to do that. The FSA ID itself will be the same one for your life.
So we like it when stuff gets a little easier every year, right? Um, the other one is, I know you talked about Pell Grants earlier. Can you, for those who are unaware or maybe have heard Pell Grant but not exactly sure what it is, can you quickly summarize what a Pell Grant is?
Okay, so the Pell Grant is the big free money grant that the federal government gives out. That was the first grant that came about in financial aid, in the history of financial aid. And other federal grants have come and gone as they cut funding, but the Pell Grant is the big one that remains. Right now, we don't know what it's going to be for the 24-25 school year, but it's running about $8,000. That's for the entire school year, so it's split between the various semesters or quarters at your school. It doesn't sound like much. It is definitely impactful at a school like ours or at a state public institution. But it is the big free money grant from the federal government. That's what
Okay.
everybody wants. It's like
Yep.
winning the lottery.
Exactly. Remember, any money awarded to you is more money than you had before. So look at it that way.
And if you
Um,
hear the word grant, it means free money.
exactly. It's like they're granting your wish too. Here's free money. Um, Another one from the audience. Does having a dependent adult living in your household affect your financial aid? This individual says they do not see a way to include that on the FAFSA application.
Correct. The FAFSA is using either for the student or for the parent. So depending on what your situation is, if you're an independent student or if you're a dependent student on your parents' taxes, who they claimed on the tax return. So if you have an adult person living at home and the parents or the student do not claim that person on the tax return, they cannot include that person in the household.
Thank you, Arianna. And then my final question for me that I wrote down is something that came up in my own family because my sister and brother-in-law are both in the military. Can you give some insight on individuals coming to colleges who want to use the GI Bill? Because I know that it is a different process than uh,
Financially.
financial aid. As far as I'm aware, I'm just living through my sister really on her experience with the GI Bill.
Okay, so, and again, it is like with scholarships and exemptions, you can get both. You can get financial aid while you're using your VA benefits. Absolutely. We get a lot of veterans here at Collin that never apply for financial aid because they're using their veterans benefits. But the great thing is that with the post 9/11 or Chapter 33, which is the big one right now, that does pay for their tuition and fees. However, then that means if they get financial aid, it's just more money directly into their pocket. If you're a dependent student, the VA benefits you're receiving do not pay your tuition and fees. You just get a monthly check. So your financial aid could be what's paying that tuition and fees and your books. So that is going to help a lot because the old Chapter 30 Montgomery GI Bill does not pay for your tuition and fees. You have to pay that yourself. So financial aid could pay for that. So we absolutely 100% tell students, please apply for financial aid. And typically the first year they're coming out of the military, they almost always are Pell eligible because they just technically got laid off from their job. So that income has gone away. And so we absolutely tell them to do that. I was in the military. I used my VA benefits. And then that 1 year got the financial aid on top of it, which was so helpful to have that.
Thank you for clarifying. I get a lot that question a lot, and it's always hard because I'm like, I don't really know, and I always refer them to an expert. But thank you for sharing that on our call today. One last thing I'm gonna push because I am a proud Collin College graduate myself. I hear a lot of people, at least back in my day, when I went to school, a lot of my fellow classmates went out to school by themselves that ended up coming back and going to community college. And going to a community college is a way to really, it's not really financial aid, but it's helpful down the road because it is much more budget friendly, as I say. And what a lot of people forget is if you are going to community college, even if it's just for your basics, you're getting your full associates or transferring, a lot of community college will actually have scholarships dedicated for transfer students, as
100%.
well as some public universities as well and some private. So if you are going to a community college and transferring to a four-year institution, please make sure you're also checking for those special scholarships for transfer students. They're not always asked about and they're not talked about as much, but they are there. So again, it's another opportunity for aid for you to continue your education uh, after high school. And I'd like to push that because I know it's not just Collin, several do, but I went to Collin. I'm familiar with Collin. I'm just going to highlight y'all for a little bit as a proud alumnus there.
Yay. Well, and if I could add, Josh, and in some instances, if there is a deal between the community college and the four-year university, it'll also waive the admissions fee to the four-year. And it's not every situation, but it's often. And some of the, if you're applying to a couple different schools, that can add up.
Oh yeah, yes it can. Absolutely. Again, small increments add up. Alrighty. Well, I do not see any more questions. I have run out of questions for myself. Again, if you had to drop off early or maybe you had to mute and, do something, this was recorded and will be available on the Texans Credit Union YouTube page within the next few days. We appreciate all of you for being here and listening to our tips, tricks, and information on financial aid for Financial Awareness Month. Texans Credit Union would like to send a big thank you to Arianna for being our guest speaker today. She greatly gave up her time and we appreciate it. We also appreciate Collin College for lending her to us for the lunch hour afternoon. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to your local financial aid office, your local college, your professionals available for that. And remember, it's your education, your future, your money. So be sure to ask all the questions and to understand what is available to you. And we hope to see y'all at the next Text Talk.